Ex-inmates. What was the stupidest thing you've seen a new inmate do on the first day in prison? Story 1. Told a kid there was a pool out in the yard. Guards saw him waiting to go out in shorts with his towel and asked him what he was doing. Kid said, "I'm gonna go swimming outside, it looks nice." Don't think I've laughed so hard in my life. It's unoriginal, but always funny. Story 2. Father-in-law did 12 years on a second-degree murder back in the early 90s. He told me that one time this new guy plopped himself down at Hell's Angels table and started eating breakfast. When he was told to move, he ignored them. After breakfast, the correctional officers ended up having to cut through about 6 rolls of duct tape to get this guy loose. He never sat near the Hell's Angels again. Story 3. There was an old myth that if you challenged the meanest guy in your block to a fight, everyone else would leave you alone. It's true, no one will torment you if you're dead. The kid tried it and got dropped off the 5th tier. First day in Gen Pop, last day in Gen Pop. Most guys just want to do their time alone. Most rape and violence in prisons are about debt or tax. If you play it straight, 98% of these guys will just leave you alone. F***ing someone up in the yard makes your time worse, not better. Loss of privilege or time in solitary, most people don't want that. Most of the straight-up psychopaths are in 23-1 lockdown anyway. You get in debt or shoot your mouth off and you will get settled or taxed. Both are to be avoided. Story 4. This may not have been his first day, but I will never forget this. This was while I was in the intake tank, which is the first tanker section that you go into after being processed in the county. This young kid comes into the county and keeps complaining that he doesn't have his cannabinol and other marijuana-related prescriptions in jail. He was really arrogant and constantly pissed everyone off. During count one day, as we were all in our bunks, he starts complaining again, and then says to the guard, "What if we all riot?" Immediately, like 10 other guys yell very loudly, "We don't know or agree with him." The guard then says, "What the f*** did you say?" And the kid then continues about rioting and that he has rights. Everyone in the tank stays like frozen in their bunks, trying their best to be non-threatening and also show that they have no interest in what this moron is saying. So the guard picks him up by his throat and slams him into the wall. After scaring the kid shitless, he explains that he has a new charge for inciting a riot. The kid gets hauled off to solitary and we never saw him again. But I heard he spent the rest of his 30, 60, 90 whatever days in solitary. Absolutely insane to me that he would say that in a county jail. Story 5. Just going to generalize. Small town folk who are used to being the biggest and baddest. Big fish, small pond type guys who think they are going to be kings when they walk in. They usually are dominated pretty quick. Dominated either by being beaten or made into a bitch. The best bet if you go to prison, hopefully no one ever goes, is unless you know someone well connected on the inside, just keep your head down, focus on yourself, and do your time. It's going to be boring, menial, and seemingly endless, but you don't want to get caught up in any gang stuff or be snitching. There's a code and system in prison that needs to be followed, and if you walk in like a king shit of Turd Hill when you're a nobody, you will learn real quick that you ain't nothing. Story 6. I found a hypodermic needle in my thin mattress and tried to give it to the guard. I was bum-rushed by an inmate, whose it probably was, and told that if I had given it to the guard, I would have faced a pee test in solitary. This was day 1. On day 3, I asked to trade laundry detergent for a back rub, and only after I did so did I realize that everyone there thought I was gay. I was a very dumb 18-year-old white girl. Story 7. Skinny kid, hippie type got busted with some Someone else on the range was getting beaten up for something or other when the kid tried to intervene. Just said, "Hey, leave him alone." Got beat to within an inch of his life in the shower. Pro tip, in jail, mind your own business. Story 8. More stupid employee. A good friend, Steve, worked as a locksmith for a medium security prison. A really unpleasant job, apparently. He bid on and got the job as a groundskeeper. He was the only actual prison employee, and his four-man staff were trustee prisoners. The job was overseeing grounds using tractors, hand mowers, and lawn equipment. Some minor repairs were allowed, and the shop had tools for repairs. The groundskeeping hut was not in the actual prison grounds, but it had its own unmonitored employee driveway and employee entrance. There was a separate locked fence driveway that went directly into prison. This was how prisoners and equipment came and went. The trustees were only searched when they returned to the prison grounds, either on the mowers or when returning to their cells. Otherwise, the groundskeeping hut was not frequently inspected. It was a plum prisoner job. My friend bought an old Harley which ran, but not well. One trustee was a made motorcycle gang member, and my friend and him bonded over motorcycles. One day, Steve brought his motorcycle to work and showed it to the trustee. The trustee listened to the motor and said the bike needed bearings, which meant an overhaul. A $4,000 job. If Steve could bring in the crew an hour or two before they were supposed to return to their cells, the trustee felt like he could use that extra hour to overhaul the bike in a few weeks. And in the first days, he totally disassembled the Harley's motor. Later that day, while returning to prison, the trustee got caught smuggling in a small screwdriver, which meant this trustee's crew would never return. Steve knew the groundskeeping hut would be inspected the next morning, and he got the motorcycle frame and wheels onto a pickup and taken out of the shop. He didn't have time to get the motor parts, which he could claim were leftover lawnmower parts, but he knew that unmistakable motorcycle frame with wheels was his termination. The next day, the inspectors glanced at the parts and made him take all the extra parts to a secure dumpster. He was reprimanded for not inventorying tools daily and having loose mower parts. The Harley was toast, but he actually kept his job. Story 9. Here in Canada, there isn't really any rape in prisons, as they look at it like, how can we beat up or kill sex offenders if we're ones ourselves? It was my first time in a federal pen, and I didn't know this golden rule. My first day I got there, I was assigned to a cell, and when I went in, this older guy was in it, my future cellmate. He told me the guy who had the bunk before me wasn't a really clean guy, and I should get some disinfectant and a mop, and pointed me in the direction of the cleaning supplies room. I went in and was filling my mop bucket when I looked up and noticed these kinds of shelves on the wall that said Government of Canada on them. On the shelves were condoms and lube and bleach. My eyes widened and I went back to the cell and whispered loudly to my cellie, "What the f***, they're encouraging r-?" I told him about the condoms and he laughed. Bro, there are gay guys in here who have consensual sex and it's their way of stopping HIV. We just use the bleach to clean our tattoo needles or dye our hair if we get bored. Hey guys, are you enjoying the video? If so, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it means a lot. Anyway, back to the video. Story 10. Worked in the hospital of a prison. The tiny white guy was an enforcer for the big motorcycle club on the outside, and his signature threat was a big Bowie knife, which they do not let you bring inside, but that did not check his attitude at all. Flash forward like 2 hours after he is checked in, and he is being beaten up by a large member of one of the indigenous gangs for running his mouth off about how he could take all comers, and got thrown in solitary for his own protection. 2 weeks after he gets out of solitary, I see him sitting in the waiting room to see the head psychologist, old crusty Eye of Sauron type, calmly tells the doctor that he is going to cut himself if he does not get put back in solitary. Doctor replies, "Okay, but I hear you have been running up a tab, so go ahead and do it. I'll get you stitched back up and sent right back out there. Time to tell me what's going on." Tatted up tiny just bursts into tears and starts bawling about his 2K debt that he's run up in 2 weeks. He went back to segregation for the maximum amount of time we could keep him there. Story 11. Come in and refuse to show their papers. This is a big no-no. Even if you're embarrassed about why you got arrested, if it's not a crime against a child or a few others, then you better be ready to prove so. If you don't, they are automatically going to assume that you're no good and you're either going to pay a rent, check out of the pod or unit, or bond out and stay out. Also, I've seen people who don't fight back if they're tested. It's better to fight and lose than to not fight at all if provoked. Story 12. The stupidest thing I've seen on someone's first day of prison is my own first day. I came in so addicted to Xanax and heroin, I was puking and both green fluid, shaking, sweating. My temp was 104 and my entire body felt like every single individual bone was breaking. And I've broken a few bones before, I know that pain. But the worst part of it was the psychotic shit I was hallucinating. Seeing people that weren't there, hearing people that weren't there, talking to people who were never there at all. I was having awful panic attacks, waking nightmares, and tremors. I was also having heart palpitations, and after a while, I started having seizures. It was at this point, specifically this point, that the medical staff decided they should probably get involved and give me an anticonvulsant before I die in this cell with like 6 other dudes in it watching me. That was all I got though, nothing to ease the withdrawals at all. Even something like Suboxone would stop my heroin withdrawals after a couple days of being clean and you can't get high off it. But they literally don't care. So it went like that every day for weeks. Don't do drugs And if you do, remember severe Xanax withdrawals can very likely cause death. And severe Xanax withdrawals truly never ends. It can and will do permanent things to your psyche. Many people who abuse Xanax will get clean and months after the withdrawals get a thing called rebound anxiety. Xanax artificially reduces anxiety, which means your brain compensates by not releasing or producing and storing the chemicals to reduce anxiety. Every time you take a Xanax, you rob your brain's natural ability to reduce anxiety. And many people who'd never had mental health problems before this will be diagnosed with severe anxiety disorders after severe long-term benzodiazepine use. Fuck that shit. Story 13. Jammed the toilet full of a big wad of paper. The cell was on the top tier, flooding the entire block. For some insane reason, the toilets just constantly have water running, like they are constantly flushing. Not sure if that's a common thing? The dude came back in, went to his cell, and immediately flooded the entire block while he was barricaded in his cell. Extraction unit came and stormed the unit, made everyone in the block lay face down on the flood of water, yes, the water from the toilet, which was legit 2 inches deep on the block, and then they pepper sprayed the out of the dude's cell, which meant in turn that we were all getting pepper sprayed, while laying belly down outstretched in toilet water. This was in Georgia, so it was legit 100 plus degrees in the block, and everyone was covered in toilet water and pepper spray. They dropped the dude out and everyone in the block was raging mad. 12 dudes maybe in the block. The dude was back in the block 3 days later. We were all still wearing the same jumpsuits because jail sucks, and that's how that goes. Thank God for soap and showers. The dude promptly got his ass beat, was pulled from the block. I assume he was taken to medical. He was fairly lumped up and bleeding, and was brought right back to the same block the same day, got his ass beat again, and after the second time, instead of moving him to another block, they locked him in his own cell. I was there for a month after that, and the dude never once was outside his cell. No record, no nothing. They literally just left him locked in the cell for 24 hours a day. This was at a county jail. Brutal. Jail. Damn, telling that story just made me think of a bunch of up shit. Glad those days are behind me. Story 14. My first day in jail was the first time I'd ever been and will ever go, that's for sure. Made the mistake of not keeping my stare in check at some dude's eyes. I kept eye-f***ing him, and anytime I'd get up from the chair in the pit, he'd come and put his coat down on my seat. I gladly never ate at the same time he did. He stared at myself from his for a long time. Real up. The doors click open for dinner, and my cellmate stayed asleep. I went down by myself and tried to do it all the right way. Wore shoes, brought my cup down, and kept to myself. Minutes later, he comes out and yells at the whole pod, "Where is my cellmate at? Who's my cellmate in 215? I said, "Right here." This dude was huge and he towered over into my face. "You're just gonna let a brother starve in here?" Saying that I'm racist and he's from Florida, he doesn't really know what it's like out here in my state. Someone else said, "That's some real shit though." I didn't know it was my job to let him know there was food. I owned up to it and said that it's not like that. I'm not racist, I've just never been locked up before. A person at our table said, "You gonna punk his ass?" He said no. I think they thought I couldn't understand them because their speech was so cryptic in a barely audible and mouthful kind of way. Maybe some people know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I got back into the cell and apologized, saying I just didn't know. He said, "This is the first time you've ever been locked up?" Said, "Yeah," and I apologized again. After, he said, "Say no more, man." I figured he meant that literally. I shut the fuck up after that. Story 15. Not prison, waiting to get bail. In the dog kennels with 20 to 30 others, maybe 20 full kennels, 2 courts going overtime. This was a Thursday before a long weekend, which meant that courts closed for 4 days. Everyone was desperate for their chance in front of the judge. A bid for bail and freedom, managing to avoid the extra 4-day lockdown. Anyway, once I've been called, have my bail approved, and get brought to processing for a few more hours. The processing area is right next to the pre-hearing kennel area, so I was up fairly early in the day, almost first out the gate of the first kennel. One guy in my kennel was a rattling and scratching crackhead. He went up and spat across the court at the judge. Must have got him or someone else. Next thing I know, they got this crackhead hauled back down into the kennels. They closed down the whole court and marked it as a crime scene. Now there is an army of pissed off criminals that want to stop the crackhead because now they won't get to see the judge to get bail. Almost caused a riot, forgot to mention that. He ended up in protection in an isolated watch cell to stop everything from getting to him. Stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Funny thing is, the crackhead would be bailed too. Got no idea why he did it. Story 16. Not prison, but jail. It was always dumb stuff that we would prank them with. One example is having someone get a look at the name on their wristband and then go to the phone like they were answering it. They would then yell the new guy's name and look around. The new guy would finally say, "That's me," and the guy on the phone would say, "Oh, here, it's for you." When the new guy walked over and said hello, the whole pod would start laughing. You don't get phone calls in jail. Another was messing with new cellmates. One cellmate and I had been cellmates for a while, so when we got a third in our cell, we'd lay out a cell schedule for him, with all ridiculous things such as, after lights out, we did 200 jumping jacks every Wednesday. We'd get to Wednesday and tell him to slide his portable bed under the bottom bunk and start doing jumping jacks and counting them off. They would 100% of the time join in, and we'd usually get to 20 or so before we couldn't contain our laughter and then explain that there was no cell schedule or jumping jacks. One time, I had been in for a year, a total of 15 months, and had some clout at that point. I'm not a hard ass, but I can handle my own and have only been in 2 necessary self-defense fights at that time. With more time in jail comes certain privileges. You get a better seat by the TV, you get into the front of the line for meals, etc. A new guy came into the pond that day, and I heard the door click open for food to be served, even though most people were already lined up after the announcement to line up. I went to the front and got my food first, as did others with much more time than most. This is jail, not prison, so anything over a year is a fairly long stay in the county I was in. Apparently, this new guy didn't take too kindly to me. Specifically, going to the front, he started staring at me for the rest of the day, a mean mug if you will. I took a shower, and when I got out, an inmate came up to me and told me the new guy had told him that he planned on just straight sucker punching me. Here's the thing, don't ever tell anyone that, especially if you're new and don't know anyone. I was well liked throughout the pod and didn't have problems with anyone, for the most part. I was generous to those who were hungry, I was a damn fine card player, I had a sense of humor and wasn't a hard ass. I didn't tolerate disrespect from race to race, and I sure as hell didn't plan on getting sucker punched. So I, in front of the whole pod, said, "Hey man, I hear you've got it in your head that you're gonna sucker punch me. Is that true?" He said it was true, and I politely asked him to go into my cell for an actual fight, not some bitch-ass sucker punch. Don't go into someone's cell for a fight, by the way. Who knows what they have prepared to attack you with. I didn't have anything but my fists, though. I proceeded to beat the shit out of him. Like he didn't get a single shot in on my face. His head and face were left bloodied and lumped. I will say that when the guards asked him what happened at dinner, he didn't say a word about me. I guess the dumb thing he did was A, not respecting privileges that come with time, and B, thought a sucker punch was the answer and told someone about it. Story 17. Admitted he got arrested in a motel room with a 13-year-old girl. This was county jail, not prison. It's no longer true that pedophiles get locked up because of PREA and all that, but they definitely are hated, and there's nothing that will change that. It's also not true that the biggest, toughest guy is the one who's respected unless it's high security. The man whose word means what he says and nothing less, and the man who fights only for his friends/himself and not for personal gain, is the man everyone will respect. And that's all you have there. Who you are as a man and snacks. I told that kid on his first day to just accept whatever shit he gets for what he did, and not to defend himself, not physically but like verbally, because you're never going to redeem yourself in anyone's eyes at that point. Someone called him a sick and this kid called him a and that was the last time he ate until he checked in to protective custody. Jail is weird. You will meet the very best people and the very worst people. If I didn't have a family that I felt I abandoned, you always will, then I would have a positive view of being incarcerated. Only like 70 or 80% of the inmates are scumbags and criminals. That place will make them into absolute animals that are beyond saving given enough time. Those other 20% that do get more than 6 weeks can come out of it with a heart and soul of pure gold, or they get put into segregation and their minds break. After 3 weeks, I saw my imaginary friend once, and they were the most human of anyone I had for weeks. That kid had to spend the whole time there. And he was 18 and scared. When he gets released, he's going to destroy some girl's life, and all that's gonna matter is him not getting caught. When that happens, it'll be the 3rd time I've seen the exact same shit occur just like that. If you even end up in jail, don't say a word and do not trust people coming up to you. Look for the guy that everyone else is going to, the guy that isn't putting on some tough guy act, and don't ever accept a 2-for-1 from anyone you didn't ask for something from. Story 18. Was in for a probation violation, not prison but jail for 45 days. This was years ago. About 15 days into my sentence, a new guy that was incredibly weird came into our sector, and I happened to be bunked with a murderer. He wasn't sentenced at this point and was surprisingly incredibly kind to me and had my back all the way through. Actually had a lot of good conversation. He came back into the block at, say, 7 p.m. just before lockdown. Guards checked him, but he did not put his ID card on the window for everyone to see. The next morning, he got knocked into a different world. Turned out he was a pedo, and someone in the block found out about his case. I mean, beaten to hell. To the point I believe they life-flighted him to the hospital. Advice for a new person going to jail. If you are not big and can't fight, don't surrender, but try and be friends with people, and you will be fine. Show some sort of kickback, but not too much. Use instincts and gauge the situation.
Ex-prisoners, what was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? Story 1. Not exactly terrible. In fact, it might actually have been the best thing I saw while in prison. This was in Oregon, by the way, reputable for being some of the least hard yards in the country. Still saw plenty of stuff, but this is the only one I like to talk about. Coming back from chow, you walk down this super long, football field length, 30-foot wide hall to get back to your cell. Walking back, I've got my eye on 2 elderly lifers, both with canes, having a pretty animated discussion over who knows what at the end of the hall. As I continue walking towards them, apparently one of them says something that the other doesn't like, because he picks up that freaking cane and just beams the other dude on the head. I think, hell, here we go, lockdown. And expect the other old-timer to go down, but nope. Homie must be made of sterner stuff because he picks up his cane and boom, full-on geriatric sword fight in the middle of mainline, a la Cliffside Inogo Montoya fight scene in The Princess Bride. Like, these dudes are really going at it. Clack, clack, clack. Occasionally getting each other. Couple of pretty gnarly lumps and gatches on each other's heads, and they're just going back and forth all over the hall. Both of them 80 years old plus, doing it Dark Ages style. The scene is wild. Eventually, the guards managed to sprint down the hall, huffing, puffing, and hosing the 2 of them down with pepper spray, and dragging them off the seg. But I'll never forget my first old man stick fight. Fun fact, one of the dudes was a cannibal who killed and ate 3 people. The other dude was a pedophile who couldn't walk the yard or he'd get killed on sight. Story 2. Not the most messed up, but this stuck with me for whatever reason. While studying medicine, I was working at a prison clinic in New York. A guy comes in with a fairly dirty cast on his arm. Otherwise, he seems fairly normal. He's there to have his cast removed, so I ask him when he had the cast put on. He says December. It's late January, so yeah, it's been long enough for the bone to heal. I figured his living conditions were the reason for the cast looking like that, so I got the okay and started removing the cast. The smell. His skin underneath looked terrible, and there were little pieces of wood and other crap embedded in the skin. Complete atrophy of the casted forearm. After further questioning, it turns out the cast had been in his arm for over a year, and it was just getting removed. I was glad to be getting out of that rotation. Story 3. Did a year spread out over a few 2 yards in Arizona, low-level yards. I didn't see much that really shocked me. I had been on the street prior to being locked up, so anything I saw happen in prison was more of the same, really. There were fights, and people catching heat from their own people for messing up and breaking rules, but for the most part, it was fairly tame. I think the part that sticks with me the most is the amount of very clearly mentally ill people who were locked up with me but were getting no help whatsoever. I mean, none of us were really getting any help, but some of these guys were clearly going to have no option when they left, except go back to what they were doing. To me, that was the worst thing I saw, the absolute apathy of the system as a whole. I was incarcerated with 1,200 other inmates in one yard in Tucson, in a complex that had, I believe, 7 or 8 other yards on it. This is, of course, one of the many complexes in AZ. This also came as a shock to me when I really thought about it. Just the incredible amount of people being locked up. Most of the people I did time with were in for non-violent, drug-related offenses. Story 4. I've never been to prison, but my cousin did, and he came back out all sorts of messed up. He was arrested for drugs. According to him, he spent the majority of his time in solitary confinement, for his safety. He said that his first couple of months there were okay, as far as prison goes. But that one day, for whatever reason, some guy who had been kept separate from the general population was accidentally put with the rest of the prisoners, unsupervised. And a few prisoners grabbed the guy, and that they stomped on his elbows and legs to break them before they sodomized him with some shivs. My cousin said that those guys did it all in an instant, and that they threatened him if he snitched. My cousin was later interviewed by some of the guards before they took the guys who did this, and so some thought that he had snitched. He says that he didn't, but that didn't matter because the guards had put him in solitary for safety, and he was eventually kept there for months longer. Because he wouldn't snitch, so they tried to accuse him of being an accomplice. Story 5. I've never been to prison, but my uncle has, and this story was really interesting and kind of disturbing. We live in Mexico, Guadalajara. My uncle has diabetes, and at the time his health was really bad. He had a divorce 12 years ago with his ex-wife, and he lost all contact, so she didn't know about his condition. She didn't receive her pension, so she sued him, and by the end of that week, he was taken to a prison called Puente Grande. He was there only for 3 days. It was easy to prove that it was impossible to work in that state, and he saw a lot of terrifying stuff there. First of all, prisoners have a hierarchy there. When new prisoners come, they're prisoners with the power to judge them and punish them according to their stories of how they got there. Guards know this, but there are a lot of people with power inside the cells. According to my uncle, they were taken to a large room by the guards, and when they left, other prisoners came and started questioning them. One of the new prisoners admitted to raping a girl, getting caught by police, and ending up in prison. The other prisoners got so disgusted that they beat him up and then violated him with a stick. He saw this happen before he questioned himself. Thankfully, nothing bad happened to my uncle when he was there, and he got out of there as soon as we were able to prove that he had diabetes. He told this story just as he got out of there, and when I was 17. Story 6. Mild to most comments here, but I had to turn myself in for a 90-day sentence at a small county jail about 15 years ago. In booking, I watched a drunk guy that had just killed someone driving, punch a guard, and beat another inmate with the payphone receiver before he was subdued. An 18-year-old kid looking at some prison time swan dove off the top of the catwalk around the upper cells and broke his neck. This happy-go-lucky guy drank an entire gallon of floor cleaner to get fucked up, and laid in the corner puking and shitting himself. The guards didn't care until he stopped breathing. The one that shook me the most, this Mexican guy, probably 20 years old, was being deported for selling heroin for the 4th time. This skinhead asked him why he kept doing it. The kid started crying and said the cartel would kill his family in Mexico if he didn't return and keep selling. He was already planning his return to start selling again. Story 7. I made a friend early on who was sentenced to life for killing a man that touched his niece. He had been locked up for about 5 or 6 years when I'd first met him. Talked to him every day for 3 years, and one day he came up to me and said he needs to talk to me about something. We do a lap on the back 40, and he tells me his old lady is leaving him, and isn't bringing his daughter up to come see him anymore. He's actually crying. I didn't know what I could do to help him, so I let him cry and told him not to let it bother him. Maybe she'll come around. We go on about our day, and everything seems normal. That night he woke me up. He bunked across the hall, crying. I got up to talk to him and he said he wants to die, and that he was glad I'm up because he doesn't want to be alone. I start hitting the panic button for my cell and screaming for a guard, but no one comes, and I have to watch while he pries his mirror off of his wall. He put on his linens and blanket like a big robe and he cuts his stomach with his mirror. It was hard to see much because of the blankets in the dark, but I could smell his blood. Then he lit his blankets on fire. The correctional officers got there when the smoke alarm went off, but they were too late. I still have nightmares about it. Screaming for him to stop, to just talk it out, but he never does. I've seen a lot of messed up crap, man, but this was probably the worst. Or, at least, it stuck with me the longest. Story 8. Was in the TV room during a late night in a dorm unit pretty early on in my 10-year bid. There were only a few guys in there since it was about to close, and I was towards the back of the room. A guy walked in with a coffee cup, sets it down on a chair a couple rows in front of me, then leaves the room again. There was an older white guy sitting in the seat directly in front of the coffee chair. A couple minutes later, the man who left the coffee comes back in through the back door of the TV room, and he walks right past me with a huge piece of metal. It looks like a giant tin can top. He walked right to the chair behind the older white guy and brought the metal around to the front of his neck and started sawing this dude's head off a few feet away from me. I was stunned and watched for a while, but I eventually got up and walked out the back door, being careful not to make furtive movements to tip off the correctional officer at the desk. The next morning, I learned the older guy was a child molester and had been nearly decapitated. The giant piece of metal was the entire top of a toilet/sink console that had been removed, flattened, and sharpened. Was definitely among the craziest incidents of violence I saw in there. Story 9. I spent a couple of weeks in county jail. On the first day, we were all being processed into the facility. Strip, bend over, spread your cheeks, and cough. We were told very succinctly to never ever even joke about suicide while in the facility. Kinda like how you just don't say bomb on an airplane anymore. By day 3, I had a good understanding of the other guys I was locked up with. I was physically the biggest of the white guys in our pod, so all of the white kids huddled around my table at meals to keep away from the Hispanic folks and the black folks. Yes, there are 3 teams in correctional facilities whether you like it or not. There was one kid in the group that seemed underdeveloped mentally. He probably had a learning disability among other things, but he essentially acted like a 12-year-old. I knew early on he was going to get himself in trouble because he never stopped talking or moving, and he was rubbing everyone the wrong way. I tried to tell him to chill out and be invisible, but he was not understanding what I was telling him. I had been there a week when the 12-year-old finally lost his cool completely. He was in the shower, singing and joking around, putting on a performance that went too far, and he pooped on the floor as a joke. After the other guys in the shower grabbed their towels and ran, he proceeded to kick the poop all over the walls and into the other shower stalls. I didn't shower for the rest of my stay, truth be told. It turned into a big scene. And then when the trustees came in to clean up the poop all over the walls, it turned into an even bigger scene. The whole time, the 12-year-old was locked in a cell near the showers, laughing and making jokes as other inmates had to clean up his poop and make the shower area sanitary again. State-run facilities have standards after all. The next day, everyone was looking at the 12-year-old with hate in their eyes, kind of like Gomer Pyle in Full Metal Jacket. Everyone missed their showers the day prior due to the poop incident, and then the kid was still up to his antics at breakfast the next day. Everyone got really cold toward him, even openly mean. I'll admit, I started ignoring him completely after the poop. It took him a day or two to realize he was hated by all, and then his personality changed dramatically. He became sad and despondent, and started talking to the correctional officers because the other inmates wouldn't talk to him anymore. He messed up and told the correctional officers that he should just harm himself and make everyone happy, and that was all it took. They dragged out the blue burrito. This is the scariest thing I had seen in jail. The blue burrito was a 10-foot-long blue foam mat like you would use in gym class, with 2 12-foot-long red belts attached. They laid it out on the floor, forced the 12-year-old to lay on the mat, and then they rolled him up with his arms at his sides into the blue burrito. The 2 long red belts clipped together at the top and bottom of the burrito kept it all nice and tight. This was a suicide protocol at the jail. No counseling, no medical ward. You lose the ability to move. They put that poor bastard in the burrito around 8 p.m., dragged him into his cell, and left him laying on the floor, wrapped up tight, until breakfast the next morning, around 8 a.m. The child molesters and gang members in protective custody get to eat breakfast first. Imagine being unable to move, barely able to breathe, with no end in sight for 12 hours on the floor of your 8x8 cell. My cell was above his, and I heard him weeping and moaning in agony all night. He didn't say a word to anyone or look anyone in the eye for that matter for the rest of the time I was there. One night in the blue burrito broke him. Story 10. I did 3 years inside Her Majesty's Prison, Belmarsh, when I was 18, having just transferred out of Young Offender Institution Cookham Wood. I was in for a non-violent but serious offense, so I was put on HB1 with all the lifters. I saw a lot of stuff go sideways quickly there, dudes having heads cracked in with pool balls out of nowhere in the lunch queue, but that all became pretty commonplace. What I will never forget is the feeling of surprise as 3 guys push past me on the stairs and wonder what the hurry was, then watching them all barrel into a single cell, not sure what was going on. The screams that came from that room were horrific. It turns out they held down the guy, a big dude too, on his bed, threw boiling water on him, and repeatedly stabbed him. We all heard the screams, but no one would alert a guard. It isn't done. Then, from my spot on the stairs next to the cell, I watched a guard walk over. His name was Mr. Geebad. He saw what was going on through the window in the door, and turned around and walked off. Doesn't describe him well enough. The guys ran off upstairs and flushed or chucked their razors and blood-stained clothes. Because Mr. Geebad didn't get close enough to ID anyone, they got nothing other than being put on basic. If he had opened the door, they could have been positively ID'd. If the CCTV worked on the wing, they could have been ID'd. Mr. Geebad was one person in a string of safeguarding failures. Doesn't mean he isn't at fault too. Story 11. Not a prisoner, but worked in a prison clinic for a few weeks while in med school. Was under the mentorship of the prison general practitioner. Had this one guy come into the clinic for a routine visit who had a colostomy. We did our physical, blah blah, and the guy was about to leave. The general practitioner mentoring me said, "Hey, check out his colostomy real quick." The guy awkwardly peeled part of his bag off, and he has these red blisters weeping fluid around his colostomy stoma. I was totally confused, and the guy left super quickly. General practitioner just shrugged. Later that day, I asked the general practitioner what was up. Apparently, the other prisoners hooked up with that guy's colostomy hole and had gotten herpes from the colostomy from the other prisoners. Haunts me to this day. What an awful day to be literate. Story 12. While not prison and certainly tame by comparison, the worst thing I saw in jail was a refusal to allow people to use the restroom. We, around 6 of us, were all waiting 12 hours for processing in a small town in NC, and were put in a concrete cell with a toilet. Every time we stood up to use a toilet, an officer would yell at us to sit back down. Those who disobeyed were forcibly handcuffed and moved somewhere else, often pissing themselves during the ordeal. I was a first year in college going to Campbell University. I was arrested and taken to the Harnett County Jail, where I was eventually served an ex parte restraining order. That order was thrown out less than a month later, but charges pending existed on my record for years after, until I could get it expunged, which cost me quite a few jobs. Story 13. Saw a lot of bad things, like the usual fights, a couple of people dying and such. One of the most messed up things I saw was what the guards did to this one inmate. I was in maximum security, and then there was a supermax segment of that, which is all tiny single cells to hold the murderers, high-profile cases, and complete nut jobs that are too dangerous for the general population. So I was a trustee doing my rounds, handing out the lunch to the single cells. This one guy demands an extra sandwich from me. I tell him it's not happening because I don't have extra, and he starts throwing stuff, including who knows what liquid at me. Well, the guard sees this, and I was cool with them because I never acted up or anything. Then he gets on his radio and calls for their special response team. Maybe 1 to 2 minutes max, 12 dudes in full riot gear walk down the hall marching and banging their clubs on their shields like something out of a movie. They let me stand there for some reason. All 12 of them somehow fit into the 6x10 cell and just beat the living crap out of this guy. The guard tells me he will handle the rest of handing out lunch. I get back to my cell near the indoor guard office, and about 5 minutes later they bring this battered dude down. They have what's called a restraining chair, which straps your ankles, legs, waist, wrists, head, and neck all down. The guy gets promptly put into it, and then rolled outside to the yard about 50 feet away. Promptly gets maced. It was 36 degrees that night, but they apparently have a rule that they can keep you out there as long as it doesn't hit freezing. They left this guy out there for a solid 12 hours with no food/water and barely any clothes. I saw him again 4 to 5 days later after he got out of the hospital/medical. One eye swollen shut, the other barely opened, and beaten beyond recognition. He called me over to his cell and apologized. Appreciate the guards looking out for me, but I felt a bit bad for what they did to him. Story 14. Cool story. I was a small-time criminal in my youth. Got locked up for some week for the weekend. I never experienced much kindness that I could remember from people, but I did in jail. I couldn't use the bathroom in my cell because I was too scared, and these guys started talking to me and distracted me so I could go. It was the strangest and coolest thing I'd ever seen. Been intrigued by behavior ever since. Story 15. I turned 6 months into 3 years of juvie time. While not really bad, this one kid supposedly fell in the shower and hit his head. Not sure if it was a planned ruse, but after he came back from the hospital, he suddenly forgot how to talk and lost his memory. He'd communicate with whimpers. This went on for a few weeks. Every month you'd go in for an evaluation, and your remaining time and your progress would be reviewed. I'm assuming he thought this act would get him sent home. The staff eventually grew tired of it, and in his review, told him since he didn't remember anything, then he'd have to do all of his time again, because he obviously hadn't learned anything to be rehabilitated. His memory miraculously returned that day. I went in for burglary at 16. The sentence was a 6-month program. Kinda like a boys' summer camp in the middle of the woods. They had a point system where you'd start with 650 points at the beginning of the week. You'd earn or lose points based on your behavior. You'd gain points for doing chores and behaving, or lose them by fighting and other stupid stuff. Above 650 points was a positive week, and you'd get candy and extra privileges like movie night and field trips. Less than 650 was negative, so throughout your sentence, they'd keep track. If you didn't have enough positive weeks when you went to your review, you'd get more time. My home life sucked, and I wound up having fun hanging out with other boys and finally being able to be a kid. The food was good. I was smart and maxed out on the placement test, so didn't really have to do schoolwork. Ended up doing enough stupid stuff to wind up at the first program a year. After a year, you go back to the juvenile detention center and they reassess your needs. and send you to another program. They can keep you until 18 if they want, as I didn't catch another charge. Just didn't think I was rehabilitated. I spent another year in another program. Same kind of stuff, but pushed a staff member, got a charge, and got sent to an adult jail because I just turned 18. Spent a year in the county, and was free after. Story 16. Not exactly prison, but how about being laughed at when you ask to show a guard that your molar just broke in half with one part in your hand and the other profusely bleeding? I'll ask the dentist for an emergency visit. Paperwork came back for a visit in 6 months. Screw Frenzo County Jail. Story 17. I've been in for 2. One charge, just transferred from low to medium security to get into a program. The low overall was a crap hole. Bad food, technically overcrowded, but it wasn't that bad. Lots of loudmouths, but no violence that I saw when I was there. The medium, however, was a different story. The good food looked more like a college campus, with no overcrowding and scores of pool tables. Saw a guy get stabbed in the head, never seen so much blood in my life. The groundskeepers kept that place immaculate. Saw 2 guys fight and topple over my tower of cereal. One, kinda soft white guy, got knocked down and had his face smashed in by a jacked up black guy. Oh, yeah, we had unlimited soda fountain use in the mess hall. Story 18. Coworker of mine here in Delaware during a riot got his teeth stomped in, and while he lay there bleeding, some of the dudes on death row surrounded a female guard and protected her from all the other dudes who wanted to rape her. Honor among thieves, how about it? They actually got their sentences reduced, I believe. Not the worst, but I hope it's uplifting. Story 19. English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by 2 others while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's vagina to check if she had come in with a parcel. This was the communal showers, so yeah, addicts don't give a crap.
What's the craziest crime you or somebody in your family has committed? Last year, my psychotic mother burned down my childhood home that her, my dad, my niece, my sibling, and siblings' partner lived in because she believed my dad was cheating on her. Despite no evidence, and this was not the first time she accused my dad of cheating with no evidence. Effectively, she destroyed everything we had built and kept in that home, along with my dad's dog and my sister's cat. Then after the fire, in what I can only construe as an act of desperation, she went to my bank and stole all of the money out of my accounts because she was secondary in the accounts. I was working on changing banks, but my new bank had yet to finalize the creation of my new account. Moral of the story is, take your parents off your bank accounts when you turn 18. She's now serving time in a county jail because she took a plea deal and got a reduced sentence, which I still believe was utter crap. She played the poor old lady act to the judge, and he took pity on her that she did not deserve. This is the woman who eviscerated my self-esteem and made my life hell ever since I was born. She was toxic and cruel, never told me the truth about anything, and is a greedy, manipulative person. I feel no shame in saying that I do not care about her. She's lost any right to my love and respect. Guess burning bridges took on a literal meaning for her. Story 2. My parents' horse got loose and somebody hit and ended it. The horse disposal people wanted some relatively reasonable amount of money to come pick up, but my parents were like, screw that. Handergle. Load that crap up on the flatbed and find somewhere to dump it. Me. Okay. Sure, Pops. Calls friend. Me. Hey, wanna go dump a horse somewhere? Friend. Sure. I've nachos. Me. Cool. Friend. Cool. So, friend and I got even more spiked than usual and took my parents' flat truck bed out and tried to winch the horse up onto it. Turns out you really can't winch a horse onto a flatbed. It's not the winching that's the problem, so much as the 5-foot lift up to the edge. We messed up a lot of that horse trying, though. Attempt number 2. We went home and built a big ramp out of plywood and 4x4s. It took most of a day and half a dime bag of grass. We argued a lot about whether or not we should bevel the part of the 4x4s that touched the ground. Final decision. Neither of us knew how to do that, so we opted for no bevel. Back at the horse, we wrapped the winch line around the head this time. We didn't quite Mr. Gooseberry. Long may he gallop in the heavenly fields. But it wasn't pretty. Nothing about that horse is pretty. But that bit in particular was remarkably not pretty. We decided to go with our original idea. Lash the front hooves together with a rope. Small problem. We'd cut the rope at some point. Neither of us could remember why or who did it, but nothing for it. We had to go home. Finding more rope required smoking half a grass, which I think is quite reasonable given the task we were set to do. Back at the horse again. Our engineering marvel worked. We had some initial worry that we would pull one or both of the horse's forelegs out of its socket, but apparently horse sinew has quite a bit of tensile strength. We used tie-down straps to lash the horse and ramp to the flatbed, initiating a discussion about why we hadn't used those in place of rope, leading to an argument over whether or not that would have worked, leading to an awkward hostile silence as we drove around the end of South Dakota looking for a place where we could dump a horse. I'm sure there were many places one could dump a horse in the middle of rural South Dakota. Strangely enough, though, we were both feeling a little paranoid. Every car that passed us was a plainclothes cop car. Every person standing out in their field was heading straight to their house to report us as soon as we went around the bend. Finally, we found a field in the Black Hills National Forest that looked like a good spot. It had trees, which we thought the horse would like, and there was a nice parking area next to a snowmobile trailhead. Goose had never liked snowmobiles, so the idea of his skeleton scaring the crap out of some ski-doer coming off the trail seemed like something that would have appealed to the old fella. We backed the truck a little ways into the ferns next to the trail. Then we used to come along to pull the horse off the flatbed. About a mile into the way home, friend said, "Does your horse have tattoos?" And I was like, "It's a horse, not a chief petty officer in the merchant marine. Why would it have tattoos?" Well, apparently some horses have tattoos, according to friend. It's how they identify them if they're stolen. Note, subsequent research revealed that this was usually only something done with thoroughbreds, which her horse was definitely not. Back at the horse again, I think they put him on the lip, inside, says friend. Have you ever pulled back the lip of a horse to look for tattoos? Worst, never have I ever. There were no tattoos, but then friend says, it's probably one of those tattoos that only lights up under UV. But then most of the grass had worn off, but there was that tiny bit of paranoia still holding on for dear life. What if there's a UV light lip tattoo in your horse, Hendurgle? They're going to catch you for sure. Nobody's going to go looking for horse lips in the woods, friend. And that's how illegally dumping an animal in federal property is the craziest crime I or anybody in my family have ever committed. Story 3. When I was a young teen, the boys from the neighborhood and I loved playing pinball and video games at our local bowling alley. Problem was, we didn't have enough money to enjoy our new habit. We decided to do something about that little problem. We started with a very rudimentary system. We actually scotch taped a piece of thread to a quarter and were able to fish it up and down a couple times before the string would break or the tape would give out. This worked fairly well, but we wanted and needed more. Our next plan was a little more professional. We somehow concocted a scheme to make quarters. A few lessons in science class had actually stuck, and we realized that we needed something to fool the coin mechanism in the pinball machine into thinking that whatever it was we made our quarters with was an actual quarter. We ended up deciding that lead would be our material of choice. We used lead for a couple of reasons. A couple of the guys' fathers were avid hunters, even reloaded his own shells. Because of this, he had a burner set up in his shop to melt down lead. Another reason is that lead is not magnetic. Science. We made a mold out of plaster and used the burner to melt lead to make our quarters. But where to get more lead? One of us came up with a brilliant thought that tire weights were made of lead. Carrying screwdrivers and pliers, we scoured the parking lots of shopping centers. We would wander through and drop down out of sight between cars. Using the tools we had brought, we would manage to get the tire weights off with little trouble. We were in business. Our production line was soon up and running. We would melt lead, pour it into our mold, cool it, and then move into finishing our new quarter. The finishing process was crude but effective. We would snip off the burr where the lead was poured. We would then file down the edge, making sure it stayed mostly round. Using steel wool and a polishing cloth, we would then shine the quarters. Now comes the trial run. We went to the bowling alley with a few quarters to see if our harebrained scheme would actually work. And they went. The pinball machine lit up and was ready to be played. Success. We intensified our production, and soon we had bunches of quarters. We were thrilled. We could play video games anytime we wanted. Every day after school, you'd find us at the bowling alley, happily playing our games. But our downfall was soon to come. Never thought of the fact that someone might notice a bunch of fake quarters being used in their video games and pinball machines. It literally never crossed our early teenage minds. We just knew we were having a blast. One fateful day, we went to the bowling alley as usual. We started playing games, and soon, some men approached us. They started questioning us and accusing us. We were scared. One of the guys yelled, "Run!" And we took off as fast as we could. We made it to the doors, and down the steps we went. We all lived in the same cul-de-sac, and that's the direction we headed. Running as fast as we could, we briefly split up. The men that were chasing us only followed one of us kids. We made the colossal mistake of running straight to his house and through the front door. From there, our crime spree ended. A few days later, I was in class when I was called to the office. When I got there, my father was sitting with a man I'd never seen before. He was wearing a black suit with a black tie. I had to go before the principal, my father, and a member of the United States Secret Service. Although they take the counterfeiting of U.S. currency very seriously, They understood that it was just a bunch of knucklehead kids making quarters to play video games. He actually told me that he was impressed with the quality of the quarters. He also said that they had recovered over $75 in fake quarters. We had made and used over 300 quarters. We had to make restitution for the money, and the charge was placed on our juvenile records. It was explained to us that if we kept our nose clean, the charge would be expunged. Luckily for me, I learned my lesson and stayed on the straight and narrow for the rest of my young adult life. And that, fellow Redditors, is how I was charged with counterfeiting U.S. currency. If that doesn't define the meaning of a crazy crime, I don't know what would. Story 4. Back in the mid-90s, I lived in a shared rented house in the north of England with our 4 ex-schoolmates. It was a bit of a den, right next to the bus station, so everyone called in on their way into the town for a cup of tea and same again on the way out. So it was always rammed, with people crashing everywhere. One morning, my girlfriend and I were woken up by the police coming into my bedroom. Illegally, they claimed to have pushed the door and it swung open, and telling us all to gather in the front room. I had my smoking stuff next to the bed. I assumed the police were there for substance, of course, so I had my stash before I came down. So we're all sitting in the lounge, hungover and that, and the policeman says, "So, who knows about the credit card?" We all just went, "What?" Because it wasn't what we were expecting. Except one of my housemates stands up and says, "No one else knows anything. It's me." And goes off with the police. Turns out a bank card had been delivered for a previous tenant, and then shortly after, a new PIN. My housemate had taken it and emptied the account of a load of cash. And what had he bought with the stolen cash? A gecko and a big fancy glass cabinet. He was struggling to pay his rent. We all were. But here was this massive green mother sitting there, sunning itself in her front room. All 6 or so of us just sat and looked at it as he was taken away. Story 5. Twin brothers boosted a car and robbed a 7-Eleven about half a mile from their house. They ditched the car 10 houses from theirs. How were they caught? Officers responded to an alarm triggered by the clerk. Officer: "Got an alarm here. What happened?" Clerk: "Tim and Tom came in and robbed the store." Officer: "How do you know it was these guys?" Clerk: "They are 6'4" twins who come in every day. I know their shape and voice." The car 911 operator: "911, what is your emergency?" Neighbor: "Was watching TV and 2 guys parked a car in front of my house. One guy got out with like a Windex bottle and cleaned all the door handles and door areas. Then opened the door and the other guy took the stuff and cleaned the inside areas. Then they ran up off the street." Dispatch: "Can you describe the 2 individuals?" Neighbor: "Well, it was Tim and Tom, the twins that live up the street from me. They're like 6'4" and they're twins. Were they really that dumb?" Story 6. Mine is incredibly stupid, but looking back, it reminds me of how actually crazy the whole situation was. When I was in 6th grade, my parents, mom plus stepdad, got married and moved to this very small, very religious, very tight-knit community. My life changed immeasurably that year. I absolutely hated my new school and all the people in it. So our morning routine was, parents get up at 6 a.m., wake me at 6:30 a.m. Both parents are out the door by 6:45 a.m. and I have to catch my bus at 7:15 a.m. Well, 11-year-old me figured out that I could just not catch my bus, and my parents, both working demanding jobs, would not be home until 3 hours after I usually got home, so they'd never know. The first day I skipped school was easy. By week 2, I realized I'd have to go back for exams, especially the state exam, which determined if you got to move to the next grade, and obviously, the school would want to know why I was absent. So I devised a plan wherein I called the school pretending to be my mother and told them my poor daughter had mononucleosis, mono, and would be in and out as she felt better. I also asked them to please change my contact number to my home phone. That way I could intercept any phone calls. And thus began the 6 weeks where I went to school only ever on days that I had exams. Unbeknownst to me, one of my teachers wrote a note with my report card that was mailed to our house. It said she was so proud of me for keeping up with my schoolwork despite being sick and out of class so often. I was in 3rd period when I got called to the office to find my vice principal, 2 very angry parents, and a truancy officer waiting for me. I had to go to court because I had missed so many days and was given community service as punishment. I was also sent to in-school suspension, ISS, for the remainder of the year. Still on my criminal record, although since I was underage when it occurred, the details are sealed. And I was 100% convicted of truancy. Story 7. It's not a bad crime or anything, but it was illegal at the time. So in Germany, up until a few years ago, we still had a general draft for the army. And a generation ago, it was very hard to get out of it. My uncle was a hardcore pacifist, so going to the army wasn't an option for him. But being accepted as a conscientious objector at the time basically required you to be a devout Christian and use the Bible as an argument for why you couldn't end another human. And my uncle was also an atheist. He couldn't realistically object, didn't want to go to the army, and didn't want to go to jail too. So he waited. He got sent his draft notice, passed the physical, and got a letter telling him to report to X company under Sergeant Y. He wrote back a reply on rose-colored paper, scented with perfume, but how much he was looking forward to serving under the strong leadership of Y, promising to obey every one of his orders and that he can't wait to experience life in the barracks together with so many strong and muscular men. He was declared unfit for service shortly after. Story 8. I was in middle school, 13 to 14, and my buddy and I snuck out of the house to go cause mischief. We did this almost every weekend, and we really only snuck out because we knew we shouldn't be. The worst we ever did was TP our other friend. Other than that, we just rode our bikes around. Except, one time we met up with a couple girls that my friend knew. We were going around our town and tipped a porta potty, put someone's patio furniture in their tree. Stupid crap like that. My buddy thought he could show off his muscles by pulling a mailbox out of the ground. I said he couldn't, and I was right. To one-up him, I pulled the mailbox right out of the ground, and we laughed like little girls as set it on the homeowner's front step. Not 10 minutes later, cops rolled around with their spotlight on. Found us, got the mailbox, and brought us home. My dad made me go back to the house, and the mailbox was in the ground already. He made me knock and apologize to the homeowner, who happened to be a 90-year-old woman with cancer. That strained me up real quick. I never did stuff like that again. Only later did I find out what I did was a crime, and I didn't feel like living that life anymore. Story 9. My uncle was a small leader in Northern California in the 90s. He had a compound out in Gold Country, had to drive through 3 gates with guards to get to his house. I never questioned it as a kid, just enjoyed heading up so I could fish in the stocked bass pond, which also had snapping turtles as a line of defense. He'd take me out shopping at the mall with a film canister that he'd take hits off of occasionally, shadowed by some bodyguards. One time we were out for a ride in his Corvette going well over 100 and got tagged by highway patrol. He talked his way out of the ticket, told the officer he was showing off for his nephew and got carried away. The officer thought it was hilarious. He told me he was lucky since he had a ton of illegal stuff in the trunk and would have made a run for it. He got arrested when I was 15. It was a full-blown, feds descended upon the compound in helicopters and swung through the windows with flashbangs. The whole 9. He was arrested, and since, if he snitched on anyone above him, he was, very bluntly, a doomed man. I took the rap. Was extradited to Lee and VA to serve a bit over 10 years. All he asked for while he was there was protein powder. He got prison ripped, and apparently harmed someone with a sock full of quarters for cutting in front of him at the payphone. At some point in my life, all 4 of my uncles on both sides, plus my dad, have spent time in prison for substance-related offenses, but this particular uncle takes the cake. Story 10. My mom set a dude on fire. When I was young, I had a babysitter named Chris. It was the uncle of my 2 best friends, sisters Abby and Becca. It was also cruel. Liked to do things to me in front of them, make them listen to my cry and scream. Nothing physical, I should mention. More psychological. Anyway, I didn't tell anyone about it. And in fact, only learned the story about 2 years ago. But it turns out that my best friends did. I told my mom and she was mad. Soon after that, there's a party at my friend's parents' house. My mom goes and sees Chris. He's all nice to her. They're outside in the backyard. She starts kind of joking around, roughhousing, messing with him. Grabs some lighter fluid and sprays some on him. Ha ha ha, just a joke. She lights a match. You wouldn't do it, would you? And she lights him on fire. According to my mom, he was put out quickly, so he was fine. But she told him that's what it's like when you're scared for your life. And then she left. Apparently, he flew back to Florida the next day. Sounds like she gave him a warm welcome. Story 11. My sister-in-law worked on a ski hill. One week, there was a promotion by a company where they would blow up big inflatables. Like the big gorillas you see in car lots. She'd seen them blow them up and deflate them for days, so she knew what the deflated ones looked like. One day, she was leaving work, and one of these deflated mascot thingies was right behind her car. My sister-in-law has never stolen anything in her life. But at that moment, she decided out of the blue that she wanted that blow-up. She plopped it in the bag and drove home. When I came to visit a couple weeks later, she was freaking out about it. She asked me if I wanted it, just to get the evidence out of her house. That is the story of how I came to own a 2-story high inflatable cow. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 12. So, before I was born, my parents were apparently going through some tough financial issues and were facing eviction if they couldn't come up with a certain amount of money by a certain date. My father decided the best way to handle the situation would be to rob a bank. So the story, as I was told, goes like this. My father walked into a small bank with a ski mask on and his hand in his pocket. I went up to a teller and handed her a bag, telling her he was robbing the place. He had a weapon and exactly how much money he wanted, which turned out to be exactly the amount he needed to avoid eviction. He got the money, apologized to the teller, and then left. He was never caught. The next part of the story is a little weird, and even I have a hard time believing it, but I know my dad. He's no liar. Apparently, a year or two later, my dad went back to the same bank he robbed every day until he found the teller he robbed previously. He walked out without a mask and handed her an envelope and immediately left the area. In the envelope was the exact amount of money he stole and a note saying that the money was for the teller, a gift, and how incredibly sorry he was for scaring her when he robbed the place. Again, he was never caught. My father is a very honorable man who was raised in poverty on an Indian reservation. Because of the cruelty he went through, both at home and at school, residential schools have a bit of history to them. He vowed that his kids would never have to go through what he did. I truly believe that robbing the bank was a result of that vow, but emotionally hurting that woman at the bank really ate away at him. So he risked getting arrested to try and make it right. Story 13. My dad was traveling through Tibet in his 20s. I don't know exactly where, but he came across what was evidently a secret Chinese military installation. Being my dad, he decided to take some photos and was somehow spotted. Armed guards, presumably shouting Chinese expletives, started running up the hill toward him. He turned around and hightailed it back over the hill to the road where he hid himself in an irrigation pipe. He had to hide there for several hours while they drove up and down the road looking for him. It makes me wonder what the hell was in that base. But it could just be that they thought he was a spy. Anyway, eventually he paid a passing farmer to hide him in his cart, and then he made it to the nearest town. After spending the night in his rented room, he packs up to get on the bus out there. Small problem. He happens to look out of his window and sees a Chinese soldier standing by the bus. I will always admire this bit of quick thinking. He decides to shave off his quite big beard. It evidently worked because he's here snoring in bed right now and not rotting in whatever Chinese equivalent there is to the gulag. Story 14. I'm late to this party, but I have a fun one. In the latter half of the 18th century, the French and British used Native Americans to supplement their own forces in the struggle for North America. I have ancestors who had a farm in upstate New York when I was in the frontier. The parents were ended by a Huron war party, and their son, who was just a child at the time, was taken by the Hurons and raised as one of their own. Years passed, and a time of relative peace settled between the French-backed Hurons and the British. Word trickled down to York, now Toronto, that there was a young white man running around the woods with Indians to the north. The British garrison at Fort York sent an officer and a trooper to an embassy through Huron country, going from village to investigate. They found the young man, my many times great-grandfather, and persuaded him to come with them back to British territory. They didn't remember his name, so they gave him the first name of the officer and the last name of the trooper for the sake of giving him some identity as an Englishman. Then the American Revolution broke out. The young man joined one of the ranger units the British Army fielded because he knew how to fight in forests and lived off the land. Obviously, the British lost the war, but anyone who fought for them was given land in Canada at the end of hostilities. He was granted land on the north shore of Lake Ontario. One of the conditions of getting the free land was that you had to clear a certain portion of it and make a certain amount of communal road along one edge of your property in a given amount of time. All the new settlers in the area worked together to get this done, and one older neighbor recognized my many times great-grandfather from when he was a boy. Your name's not so-and-so. It's such and such. You're the spitting image of your father. Oh, says my many times great-grandfather. I then wrote to the British authorities. To whom it may concern, I fought in the most recent war against the Americans. My name is such and such. Here's my former commander's name and address. He'll vouch for me. I believe I'm entitled to free land. As luck would have it, I own a farm and the lot behind me is unclaimed. Did I have that one? And they gave it to him. 200 and some odd years later, the record of that petition and land grant still exist. He used his real name to defraud the British government out of a second land grant for the same military service. I've always thought that was a cool story. Story 15. My dad had this really weird habit of stealing signs, which is manifested in a bizarre way twice. The first requires a minor backstory in that his family has lived in our small town since it was founded, and as such, we have a street named after us. My dad insists that because the street sign has got his name on it, it's technically his property, so he annually steals it. The second, I'm not even quite sure how he pulled off. You know those giant highway signs that direct you to what lane you need to be in for your turnoff? Where I'm from, they're huge and green. Somehow, this madman has managed to get one into his shed overnight by himself. This thing could easily weigh a literal ton. I'm so impressed. He also acquired other strange things, such as a Ford factory sign, also one of the giant ones, several billboards, commemorative plaques, carousel horses, and a bunch of other miscellaneous. Whenever he runs out of space, he just builds a new shed. He is also not allowed in Canada, but won't tell me why. Story 16. This one is a bit lighthearted, but I technically may have committed a war crime. I started doing stand-up comedy before my second deployment, and when we were shipped out to Afghanistan, I didn't want to lose the momentum that I'd gained, so I would do shows in the chow hall, and I ordered a bunch of books about how to succeed at stand-up. One of them suggested practicing crowd work, where you talk to the crowd by asking about their job, where they're from, etc. After a raid, we detained some combatants and had to hold them for a few days before the intelligence guy could come pick them up. So when I was on my guard shifts, I'd have an interpreter and I'd ask things like where they were from and what they did for a living. And then I'd try to make jokes about it. I wasn't a schmuck, but it wasn't all that funny either. After they got picked up and the intelligence guy started interrogating them, they said, "We told the other guy." And then my commander got an angry phone call about how I technically performed unconventional interrogation and should never do it again. I haven't done crowd work since. Story 17. My father-in-law hired his son to end his second wife. This was several years ago and they were never prosecuted despite investigation. They recently reopened the case, so we're all waiting to see where it goes this time. My best friend has a bunch of crazy stories, so I'll pick one at random. One day, he, his wife, and multiple kids were eating dinner at his mother's house when a SWAT team kicked in the door and pointed at all of them. They were looking for his wife's brother and for some reason thought he would be there. Turns out my friend hates the guy and took umbrage with weapons being pointed at his family. He tells the SWAT team that he'll find the schmuck and to wait a second while he grabs some stuff. He goes to his room and returns wearing a bulletproof vest, yelling, "Follow me!" This dude proceeds to a house where he kicks the door off the hinges, walks in, blasts the TV, and demands to know where Dylan, name changed to protect the guilty, is. There are multiple dealers in this house and users, startled to say the least. A girl there claims she knows where Dylan is, so he takes her and forces her into the car. This is in full view of the SWAT team, by the way. The girl directs him to a second den. He kicks the door and it proves sturdier, so he blows it apart and enters a room with weapons drawn on him. He demands to know where Dylan is. It turns out Dylan owes these people money, so they tell him where they think he is, which is a third house. On their way there, with the girl still in the car, he gets a phone call from Dylan saying he's at the said house and to please not hurt him. Apparently word was getting around that my boy was on the warpath. At the third house, the people shove Dylan out the door and SWAT, still following, arrests him. Apparently this whole thing amused them to no end and they're in tears laughing at my friend and give absolutely no care about what he did to get the guy. So he's driving the girl back and halfway to where he got her from, he tells him that if he pulls over, she'll have intimacy with him right then and there. He pulls over and drags her out of the car and tells her, "I have a wife and kids, you witch." He then goes home and no one presses any charges. The next day he straps on his tools and goes to the first two houses and to their astonishment, he replaces their doors. Story 18. Craziest ones I'm willing to talk about. Spent 3 days with a chick from somewhere in Mexico. Met her at her friend's dad's house. She just hung out with us. She didn't speak English, drank and smoked with us. Happened to meet up with a bilingual friend who struck up a conversation and learned she had been bought by a friend of mine's dad. He, the son, was one of us. She wanted to be deported and go home. This guy's dad was always sketchy, but no one was aware of trafficking issues back then like they are today. We dropped her off at INS. We weren't willingly breaking the law, but I'm sure we would have caught charges if we had been busted or something while she was with us. His dad did time over that before it was all over. To be clear, intimacy wasn't involved with this situation on our part. It was super tense and weird having her with us. All we knew was we showed up at this guy's house and he gave us $500 and said, "Take her away from here." I hate to think what all happened before that. Another unwitting crime. Pulled a guy out of a river that tried to end it all by drowning. Did CPR. He said his mom is suffering in New Orleans and he can't get there in time, so I take him there. 4-hour trip by car. I'm home the next week and his picture is on the news. They caught up with the guy later, or so I heard. In high school, I drove to Arizona in search of good grass because our area was dry. I don't even know why Arizona. Found a different one instead and went AWOL for a week tripping. There's more, but I won't tell it here. All this was back in the 90s, so the statute of limitations and all that, but it's still better to leave some things in the past. Story 19. It's only the craziest because I was so young. As for my dad, he just has a long rap sheet of driving under the influence. However, when I was in second grade, I started breaking into houses in my neighborhood and vandalizing them with my friends because we didn't know what for rent meant. It was just empty houses. We eventually made our way to stealing mail also, all at the same time. My mom found out about it. Called the cops and told me I was under house arrest because what I did was bad, and she told me a drone in the sky was watching me all the time, and if I left the yard, they would come and take me to jail. My friend who was doing this with me, her dad was a resource officer. I don't know what they're called, lol. Out of jail and took her with him and made her sit in the classroom and told her it was her cell. I ended up doing yard work for an old lady I stole some silverware from. Her name was Gretchen, and she was the sweetest lady I'd ever met. I didn't mind planting flowers and such with her because she was always so nice and fed me. Story 20. Definitely not the most exciting or dramatic story in this thread, but here it goes. My aunt, dad's sister, married a really nice guy when I was about 9 years old. I come from a family of mostly white-collar, educated people, attorneys, dentists, etc. So when my aunt married this guy who was a very successful attorney, incredibly intelligent, kind, and everything you'd want, we were all thrilled. Things were going good for a very long time. He was successful, that side of the family joined a country club, and my aunt and uncle lived a comfortable life. My dad, who's also an attorney, called me one day in 2010 to tell me that my uncle had been disbarred for double billing. We were disgusted and appalled because there was no reason for him to do this. He was already a millionaire, so why double bill? They got disbarred again a few years later for the same exact thing. I guess my uncle never learned his lesson. I have no idea why he did it. Not just once, but twice. He had more than enough money to live comfortably ever after, retire, and still maintain their country club lifestyle with my aunt. I believe he lost his law license over it as well. Recently, while doing some research on Ancestry.com, I was asking my dad questions about him. Lol. Dad told me they had to sell their mansion because my uncle had a massive stroke and can't walk stairs. My dad is also disgusted with him that he refuses to even talk to my aunt or uncle. There are other factors involved as well, because of his terrible mistakes as an attorney. Why? Because A, he knew better, B, could have retired, and C, did it at least twice and got caught. The guy's almost 80 too. I think he's in a wheelchair now, and my aunt and him had to downsize to a condo so he could move around in his wheelchair. I truly hope he gets better, but seriously, dude, quit breaking the law. Story 21. 16,000 comments deep, so probably no one will see this. My mom dated a real schmuck who was emotionally and physically cruel towards us. He bought an RV and a truck top camper. They were both parked at our house, but only he had the keys. Whenever anyone misbehaved, he would take some items of ours that was important to us and put it in the camper or RV. We never got the items back. They did this to my mom as well. A couple of years went by and the campers were still stuffed full of our things, along with a bunch of other stuff. I'm not entirely sure because we were never allowed in either one and never allowed to be around when he went into them. From the brief glances I had here and there, they were pretty well filled to the brim, order style. Eventually they broke up. He left and took his crappy campers full of our stuff to live on his sister's property. He stalked us and pestered us for at least 5 years after leaving. I think he would still drive by and even go into our yard for many years more. It was way less intense and just kind of became normal, I guess. Not exactly sure how long after he left this incident happened, but I would guess the first year, as that was when his stalking, pestering, and threatening behavior was the worst. As you can imagine, it was really stressful and traumatic for everyone. My mom definitely got the worst of it, as he would show up at her work and call her there. She eventually got a restraining order. Not that it did much. Anyway, my mom started getting really angry over everything he was putting us through. One night we came home and things were missing from her house, like TVs, a camcorder, and some other stuff. My mom called the police, who said that since they were married and despite a restraining order, there was nothing they could do about him coming into her house and stealing things. Throughout the time they dated and through the breakup, the police were absolutely worthless. It would hurt her. No charges. You provoked him. He would break in and steal things. Nothing we could do. He would call constantly, run her off the road, make threats, and all we got was, "You have no proof." I guess the cops refusing to help her was the last straw. I think my stepdad taunted her that he chucked the items in his camper. Anyhow, I'm a kid, so bedtime comes and nothing seems out of the ordinary. I go to sleep. I wake up in the morning and my mom has a bad dog bite in the back of her leg. She tells some story about a dog coming up behind her and biting her on the leg last night. I forget the story exactly, but it was fishy. Later that morning, the angry call started from my stepdad and there was a visit from the cops. This was when I learned his camper is mysteriously caught on fire the night before. Campers catch on fire. Suspicious dog bite. I'm too scared to ask, but my mom, of course, denies it to the cops. There's no way to prove she was involved, so aside from my stepdad being angry and increasing the phone calls, nothing happens. My mom had to do wet to dry dressings for some time because she had a wound. It took months to heal. and she has a large scar. Fast forward many years, maybe 25 to 30, I finally worked up the courage to ask. That night, my mom put us all to bed, snuck out of her house, and burned his RVs to the ground. She was hiding in the bushes at some point. She must have gone too close to a stray dog's den of puppies. The mother dog locked her jaws onto my mom's calf and wouldn't let go. She said knowing he was going to stick her things in the RV one more time pushed her over the edge. She knew we were never going to see any of the stuff ever again, despite her asking repeatedly to return it. And asking proper legal channels never got her any help, so she just burned it all to the ground. If you ask me, that's one small piece of justice we ever got. Thanks, Mom. He's gone now, and I'm not the least bit sad. What a goddamn monster. Story 22. In 1970, my dad had a buddy who was living in Boston, Massachusetts, but wanted to move back home to hometown city, Ohio, but didn't have a car. So my dad and his friends said they'd road trip out to get him in Boston, party for the weekend, and drive back to Ohio. My dad said as they piled in the car to start their journey to Boston, they loaded a couple cases of drinks in the car, and their friend said he had a surprise for all of them. My dad's friend turned to them and each gave them a head of the good stuff, and said this would make the trip fly by. A few hours into the drive, they're tripping pretty hard and have had a couple drinks each at this point, and they get pulled over. The driver pulls over, my dad and his friend start freaking out and shove the empty bottles into the seats, put their feet and jackets over the cases. The officer comes up to the window, knocks on it, and the driver rolls down the window and asks what's the problem. The officer asks if he knows how fast he was driving. My dad said they all immediately looked at one another with huge eyes and everyone was silent. My dad told me he was silently thinking, Jesus Christ, we had to have been doing 100. Scenery has been melting. The driver finally said no, and the officer licked every single one of them in the face. The officer said, "You were driving 10 miles per hour on a 65 miles per hour highway. Are you having car trouble or what?" His friend politely said, "No, sorry about that. Was just being extra cautious, you know?" And the officer looked at all of them again, shook his head, and told them to speed it up or get off the highway. My dad and his friends burst out laughing and crying as soon as the officer walked away, and they continued their journey and safely retrieved their friend in Boston and back to Ohio.
Have you ever experienced or witnessed a real world's dumbest criminals moment? Not mine, but rather my sister's coworker. Pardon the third-hand information. So my sister used to work at a bank and a Walmart, and her coworker had this somewhat older pickup truck, about 15 years old at the time of this story. The truck was pretty unremarkable in every way. Stock parts, stock stereo, average looking. Some idiot punched out the driver's side window and stole the CD player, which didn't play past track 7 on any given CD. Mind you, it was stock and also 15 years old. Instead of disconnecting the plugs like a normal thief, he cut all the wires, making it a stolen CD player that now required repair. The idiot made a mess all over the inside of the truck because he punched the window in, and proceeded to wrap his hand up in one of the girls' spare work shirts. After taking the CD player, he then walks into Walmart and tries to steal a TV. Not one of the newer TVs that only weighs like 25 pounds, but the big tube TVs that weigh like 80. So when he walked out, the alarm went off. He told the person at the door that it was a return and he was simply taking his old one back to his car. Keep in mind that he still had a red bank teller's polo wrapped around his hand. It had an employee's name on it, an employee who was working at that store at that moment. Of course, the friend in the store pressed charges. The friend was also offered an appearance on one of those judge TV shows, but declined because the case was too stupid for a daytime judge show. Right, too stupid for a daytime judge show because damn, that's an entirely deeper circle of stupid. Story 2. Over the last 2 years, I worked at a Jimmy John's and one day we got robbed. He waited for all the customers to stop pouring in and went to the bathroom for about 15 minutes. Was he about to whiz himself from excitement? Did he get a sudden call of nature? I don't know, but a coworker walked by during this time and heard him loudly talking to himself, which I guess was to get pumped up. Then he finally walks out to a completely empty JJ's, orders a sandwich. He was clearly nervous and something was up. As soon as the register was open, he goes, "I have a knife, give me all your frickin' money." The girl on the register was a super nice girl, so she totally blanked. However, our GM at the time, a fat Mexican guy in his mid-20s who grew up in a bad neighborhood, just nonchalantly goes, "I don't believe you. Show me your knife." The robber starts bickering with our GM, but the GM stays calm and tells him to show it. So he finally takes his knife out and waves it at us, saying he'll frickin' jab us if we don't give him the money. Now here's the best part. We all work with knives and they're really freaking sharp, but our Mexican, it's an affectionate term, takes this as a challenge and grabs our knife and starts chasing him out the store and down the street. The best part is he's so short and fat, he's waddling in an apron as he's running, yelling, "Fight me like a man, Yoto." When the police came, the guy was gone, but to this day, our GM tells that story to every new person we hire. Store was in Carroll Stream. The GM's name was Sebastian. Story 3. When I was 19, I was the target of a failed carjacking by what appeared to be some sort of gang initiation. It's funny how you remember all the little details of a moment like that. It was about 10 p.m., and I pulled up to a red light after having dropped my girlfriend off. There was a late 80s tan Chevy Celebrity in the left turn lane. Suddenly, the driver door of my 1994 Saturn opens, and I turn to see a young, maybe 17-year-old black female in a black sweatshirt and jeans. Just as I'm registering what I'm seeing, she points the end of the chrome and black 99mm handgun on me. "Get out of the car," she says the words, but her voice is actually quite quivery. She's clearly very nervous, but she is the one holding a fairly large weapon and pointing it squarely at me. In the background, I can hear her friends. There's more than 2 of them, and from their car comes a torrent of derogatory names and slurs at me. I suppose as encouragement for her? I put my hands up, adrenaline kicks in, my mind goes into this sort of disconnected, hyper-observant state. I find myself analyzing all sorts of weird details while my brain makes what seems like autopilot decisions on what to do next. I considered trying to speed off, but unfortunately I drove a manual and had previously put it in neutral and pulled the handbrake. Now this is a particularly long red light as I'm on a small street crossing a major thoroughfare. I could see this girl's finger squarely on the trigger of this gun and she is clearly nervous. I have to assume the gun is loaded and she could kill me by accident if I make a sudden move. I noticed that the song I had been playing rather loudly, Hitherto by the Cocteau Twins, paints this entire situation in an oddly surreal and appropriately dark light. That thought is suddenly interrupted by her actually hitting me in the forehead with the end of the weapon. I said, "Get the hell out of the car." I decide to do what she says, but I assume her friends are armed too, and I'm actually thinking about the possibility they might hit me, even if she doesn't. I slowly undo the lap belt. Mine was one of those early 90s cars that had those automatic shoulder belts that helpfully move forward when you, or in this case, an underage gun-wielding gang member, open the door, and climb out of the driver's seat with my hands up. While doing this, my carjacker and I never break eye contact. I am now standing between the 2 cars, abeam the rear doors. My carjacker is standing by the driver door of mine, facing me and still pointing the gun at me. I steal a glance at her friends. There are at least 4 of them. It's dark, so I can't see into their car clearly enough to see if they're also armed. They continue to encourage her and call me names. I see cars stop at the crossing intersection, notice us, and then speed off. On the one hand, I feel abandoned by them. On the other hand, I wouldn't want some vigilante to decide to intervene and get me. I look back at my carjacker. Her arms are extended straight ahead of her shoulders like she's either trying to be extra menacing with a gun or wants to hold it as far away from her body as she possibly can. Her finger is still on the trigger. The end of the gun is shaking. It occurs to me, again, that she could accidentally easily fire this thing. My immediate thought is to try and calm her down. I hear myself in a shockingly calm voice say, "I'm not going to do anything. What do you want to do now?" "Give me your loot." Honestly, that's what she said. I know this because having several friends who are SCA members, what I hear is, "Give me your loot." And I must have given her the most puzzling look ever displayed by a carjacking victim in all of history, because who the heck says loot? "Give me your goddamn wallet." Oh, right, duh. So I remove my wallet from my pocket and I hold it out for her. She snatches it, but then finds herself in the awkward position of having her hands full and not wanting to turn her back on me. She looks from me to my car door to me and back a couple of times like she's trying to work out what to do next. I decided it would be best to let her and her friends know that she doesn't need any assistance from any of them. I start backing away slowly. I nod towards my car, sitting there with the door open, engine running, and Cocteau Twins music blaring. "Go ahead, I'm not going to stop you." About the time I get to the back of the 2 cars, she jumps into mine and closes the door. Her friends peel out through the red light and are almost T-boned by a pickup, which would have totally made my night, but the collision is avoided and they continue on. I walk around the back of my car to the curb, assessing the area and realizing there's not a gas station or payphone within a block of here. Again, it was the early 90s. I wasn't a substance dealer or stockbroker, so I didn't have a cell phone. So I round the corner and start the trek up the larger thoroughfare towards the next block where there are actually gas stations. That's when I realized it. I can still hear my car, muffled Cockatoo Twins music and all. The engine is revving over and over and spinning back to idle. The horn beeps. The engine revs again. Oh my God. I turned around to confirm what I'm hearing as the ridiculous realization hits me full force. This girl has no idea how to drive a manual transmission vehicle. I look back and see her furiously banging on the inside of my car, trying to figure out what to do. The transmission in the early 90s Saturns was fairly stiff, and the Syncross would completely prevent you from forcing it into gear without the clutch, which was apparently all she had thought to try and do. She pulled and shoved and stomped the gas, and nothing happened. Finally, after what must have seemed like forever for her friends came back to investigate. A shouted conversation across the road went like this. What's wrong? I can't drive a stick. What? I can't drive a frickin' stick, goddammit. Get in the frickin' car, stupid. Make sure you got his wallet. So that's how, after being carjacked, I was able to drive my own car back home and call 911. I did lose my wallet, but I got this cool story to tell. Story 4. I work at my family's liquor store, and we have a debit credit machine where we take the card, punch in our store ID, cashier ID, then amount, stick the card in, and hand it back. So this one fellow comes in and grabs a six-pack from the cooler and comes to the counter. He was the only other person in the store besides a random guy in a corner going through wine, so I ran the six-pack in when I saw him grab it. He came up to the till and I asked him how he was doing, and he said fine, and I told him his total as he was just pulling up to the till. And he mumbled something and reached into his coat and pulled out a gun and placed it on the counter with the barrel, or whatever you call that part that it shoots from, facing me and slides it a few inches forward. Due to being used to people doing that with credit debit cards, I just stretched out and grabbed the gun with one hand and the debit machine in the other. He wasn't holding onto it very firmly, so I just pulled it away and realized as soon as I grabbed it that it was a gun, not a credit card. So I froze with his gun in my hand and the debit machine in the other. We looked at each other and then he bolted, leaving the gun behind. I called my uncle and then the cops, who came and took a statement and afterwards told me that the gun was empty, so I wasn't in any real danger, but it's still one of the funniest things to ever happen to me. Alright, so he must have looked like such a baddie for that half second that he didn't even realize what he was doing. Poor guy was trying to trade his gun for a six-pack and he turned it on him. Alright, so if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Let's go on to the next story. Story 5. I work part-time in a grocery store that is robbed all the damn time. Like seriously, once or twice every month. It's gotten to the point where I now just laugh every time I arrive at work to see the store has been broken into again. So one particular night, just before we were beginning to close, a brazen robber ran into the store who appeared to be no older than 20 with a cricket bat and nervously demanded the money from the register. The clerk obeys and gives the man about $200. The reward hardly seems proportional to the potential ramifications. And at this point, the customers at the front end are backing away. The man attempts to make an escape. As he breaks for the door while I'm standing in an adjacent aisle where the soup pleasantly happens to be shelved, I grab a big old can of tomato soup and give it a friendly toss in the vicinity of his face. KO, slam dunk, hole in one. He takes a comical fall into the flower display in a glorious explosion of flowers and water. Then every male customer jumps on the jerk and pins him down until the police arrive. Story 6. Not my own story, but an acquaintance from years ago. He was working nights at a gas station, a convenience store, and had a group of usual customers who he got to know the comings and goings of. One man in particular was known to pretty much always wear the same clothes and stood out because he only had one eye and, being poor, wore a patch over the non-functioning eye. He came there every night to buy cigarettes and also rented movies a couple of times per week. So the store had his name and address. One night, old acquaintance was working at the station when Eye Patch Man came in, but he was wearing a large paper bag on his head. Employee: Hey man, here for your usual smokes? Patch: No, this is a frickin' robbery. Employee: Ha ha ha, good one, and proceeds to put this guy's cigarettes on the counter. Patch: I'm serious, give me all the money in the drawer. Eventually, the guy figured out the robbery attempt was real, handed over the money, and then called the police when the eye patch man left. Now, it's pretty stupid to rob a place where you regularly shop and where they have your name on a computer as a video renter, but even more dumb than that, he only cut one eye hole in the paper bag. Okay, so it's things like this that make me think I could get away with crimes and cutting two wouldn't help at that point anyway, huh? Story 7. I work at a grocery store, and a few months ago, a gentleman decided to steal some steaks. This is pretty common. Steaks are easily the most common big items that get shoplifted here. Most people think stick them in a coat pocket or something and walk right out. Not this guy. This guy had a better plan. He took them out of the wrapper and placed them under his hat. Now, if he would have just left the store right now, like most people that take stuff, he would likely have gotten away with it. But the meathead decides that would look too suspicious. So he goes to the register and buys one pack of gum. That's it, because a guy waiting in line for 10 minutes to buy a single pack of gum at a giant grocery store doesn't look suspicious. Also, what made him look suspicious was that there was red dripping down his face from the steak. I wish I could have seen it, but apparently it was enough for the cashier to ask if he was okay. He freaks out. They actually called an ambulance for him. He waits for the ambulance to arrive, and obviously they did not find anything other than meat under that hat. There was another situation, and this one that I actually dealt with personally. I work in the prepared foods department where we sell fried chicken, pre-made potato salads. During the summer, most of our business comes from doing large catering orders, typically for graduation parties. We had a very large order for a 2 o'clock pickup, about a $350 order, which is usually big enough to qualify for the largest of the week. So the lady who placed the order, who didn't prepay for it, which is pretty rare for orders of this size, came in to pick it up at noon. We tell her that we don't have any of her food done yet because we have her down for 2. She starts crying, saying that we screwed up, which is common. We do, a lot. We're not very organized with this system, and I work with some boneheads myself included. That this was for a funeral reception, etc., etc., etc. She pointed out she already grabbed a large sheet cake from the bakery that they had at noon. This was good enough for us. So we're in full panic mode because we had messed up big time here. We slowly pieced together about $200 worth of food from anything prepared that we have laying around, and the store manager told us to be prepared to give it to her for free because not only is it less than what she ordered fried chicken and potatoes, and we're giving her baked chicken and green beans. So we go to ring her out and tell her that we're still going to have to charge her for the cake. I didn't really notice it at the time, but she got weird about it. She said she didn't have the price tag, to which I replied, no problem, I'll just call the bakery real quick. So I do. Oh, she's getting that cake for free. We messed up. She placed an order for noon, but we took her down for 2. What are the chances that 2 departments messed this up? So I get the store manager and he confronts her and she runs out of the store crying. We like to think that she really did need to cater an event with $230 worth of food, and since she tried to scam it out of us, she showed up empty-handed. The cool part is that we got to eat the cake after. Story 8. I used to work at a liquor store in my college town, usually nights and weekends, aka the busy shifts, because I had been working there the longest. This also made me the de facto head clerk while the owner was in his home above the store. The store was laid out so that the front door was right by the registers and the back door was right by the entrance to the beer coolers, partially hidden by the aisles. One particularly busy night, while going to restock the beer coolers during a lull, I saw a couple girls exit the back door from what looked like the beer cooler. Since I didn't see them leave the cooler specifically, I called the owner to make sure. He confirmed from the security camera footage that they went into the cooler and grabbed a couple of things before seeing me approach and bolting. Unfortunately, the camera never got a good shot of their faces, so I figured they got away scot-free. That is until I went into the cooler to finish restocking and saw that one of them had left their Android phone on a shelf in the cooler. I took it back behind the counter and waited. Sure enough, they all came back, and one of them asks if we found her phone. I say, sure, do you have the beer you stole? Assuming she would know the gig is up. Nope, she insists that she was looking for the bathroom. At this point, I called the owner again to ask if I should call the cops. He says he's feeling merciful and will give up the phone if they pay $20, which was only a little more than the value of the beer they stole. By now, her friends have left, so I relay her the owner's deal. Intent on demonstrating that her supply of stupidity has not been exhausted, she claims to not have a credit card or cash despite having a rather full purse, and demands to see her phone so she can see if it's really mine. At that point, I told her to give me the 20 or we'll just keep the phone. She still refuses to pay despite the fact that her phone was worth at least $500. Then she threatens to call the cops and accuse me of stealing her phone. The fact that A, I was holding her phone in my hand, and B, she was the one who stole from us in the first place did nothing to dissuade her. I was only able to get her to pay the money when I picked up the store phone and started dialing the number for the local station. Okay, I wonder why her phone was out while stealing beer, probably updating her social media about it. Smart, right? All right, so if you liked any of these stories and were affected by any one of them, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.